So, as the CTO of what I would call a high technology company,
Yes.
I mean, I have never run into so many PhDs in one place as I have in the last 24 hours, and many more that I don't even know if they're PhDs. You're responsible for kind of looking down the road. The way I describe it, the strategic thinkers are, the troops have their eyes down a little lower, and the strategic thinkers have to look up more towards the horizon.
Sure.
So looking down towards the horizon, what do you think that enterprise IT, whether they're IT decision makers that are looking at cloud and are concerned about the security aspects of it,
Mm-hmm.
what can you reassure them about it, or what can you say, what should we keep an eye on, and how should we best position ourselves to be ready for when the dust settles on all of the security
Sure.
aspects?
So I think, as I said this morning, in the context of an enterprise looking at the cloud to move out, to move services out to the cloud, whether SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, I think enterprises have to start letting go of this notion of they would want to maintain firewall infrastructure or IDS infrastructure or application firewall infrastructure out in the cloud. They've really got to leave that to the cloud vendor and basically just presume the cloud vendor is going to do that, and it becomes a service offering that the cloud vendor has. Salesforce.com already does this as a SaaS application. You don't worry about the firewall rules that Salesforce is using today. It's part of their service level agreement. So with leaving that behind, what an organization then needs to think about is, all right, the next level now is the application. That's what I really care about anyway. The first thing about an application I care about it is the authentication side of things and controlling access to those cloud applications, and how do I do that effectively. If you think about that scaled across hundreds of cloud applications across multiple cloud vendors, because you're not just going to have one, you're going to have, even for risk reasons, risk tolerance reasons, redundancy reasons, you're going to have more than one cloud vendor in your environment. You're going to have to deal with how do you control access to all of those cloud applications, which really aren't in your control anymore. That means the cloud vendors and the cloud applications need to externalize how they handle authentication, which we're seeing with single sign-on. But more as importantly, they need to externalize how you do account management, how you do authorization, and how you do auditing on access logs and things like that. So they're the next level of things we start to have to consider solving in a standards-based way after we address the authentication problem. So, as an example of that, if you look at an account management piece or user provisioning, today all the cloud vendors use proprietary APIs. Our customers are saying, what's the standard going to be that we can use rather than having to build proprietary connectors to all these cloud vendors? I suggest people take a look at portable contacts as a protocol that could be a starting point for this being done sort of in a restful way for these cloud vendors. I also think that in that regard, that enterprises need to start to shift their thinking about them pushing information into the cloud and having cloud applications, because there are hundreds if not thousands of them, pulling that information from the enterprise. So have the applications themselves take more ownership and more control around what they're going to allow users to do. And we've sort of talked about this as, historically just-in-time provisioning, where during the SSO event from the enterprise to the cloud application doesn't necessarily have a user account for that user at that point in time, but there's enough information in the SAML token such that when that cloud application looks to its database and says, I don't have a user now, it can take that information from the SAML token and create that user account effectively on the fly and let the user in. But as that starts to scale and you get to more sophisticated use cases, like I changed role in my organization, hence where once I was provisioned into the payroll application, but I've left the payroll group and now I'm in the accounting group. If you're using this just-in-time model, you have a deprovisioning problem. Why should I shouldn't have access to the payroll app anymore because I'm not in the payroll group. So again, rather than this being a back-channel, batch feed type model across thousands of applications in the cloud, the cloud apps have to get smarter and shift even further from what I've called just-in-time provisioning to just-in-time authorization. which is where the application needs to call back to the enterprise and say, every time the user might access that app, hey, is he still allowed to use that app anymore? Okay, and this starts to externalize these authorization decisions so that the apps can start to rely on infrastructure you can maintain in the enterprise, such as in your directory, your Active Directory, around who can access what, and not have to mirror all that information out of the cloud.
Well, that brings up a great point that had me thinking about this is, most corporations have their identity stored on-premise in Active Directory or some other similar type of identity store. When they're looking at some kind of cloud vendor that needs identity out there, and I've seen you had this in your CTO blog also, what should they and should they not allow, should they and should they not consider when they're looking at a SaaS vendor? Identity local federation out to it rather than any kind of...
So I think in today's world, where we are right now, there should definitely be an expectation that the SaaS application or the cloud vendor can support SAML for single sign-on. I mean, that should be a baseline. I mean, so that you can take control of how the user authenticates and can start to add stronger authentication if you want to, and it could be under your control, effectively. I mean, that's the baseline for that. As important is the ability to programmatically add, update, and delete user accounts in those SaaS and cloud applications. It's tough for me to say a SaaS vendor has to support a standard there, because really there isn't one that's been sort of decided upon that would make sense. But at least having that API gives you control, programmatic control of who can do what out in those SaaS and cloud applications. The third is most SaaS and cloud vendors implement APIs. So there's browser access, effectively, and then there's API access as well. And just because you've eliminated the need for a password in the SaaS application via browser access because you have single sign-on there, but really it needs to be solved on the API side as well, because if you're writing some installed application against those APIs, you don't want to have a SaaS password because you're just using the APIs. Hence, you need to have a single sign-on solution on the APIs as well. And the standard that they should be thinking about using there, rather than doing something proprietary, is to use OAuth 2 as the standard to secure and enable SSO on their API sets as well.
Okay, great advice. And because people are trying to make these evaluations, and sometimes they're coming from a blank slate and they're not sure where they want to go on that.
Sure, yep.
Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. This has been a terrific conference. I mean, for having only been here 24 hours, it's like information through a fire hose, and we still have another half day to go.
There we go. Well, Sean, thank you very much. Thank you very much for being there and inviting me to talk today. So I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right.
Bye.